People with clutter typically love things, and sometimes those things are part of a larger, curated collection. In this podcast, we're going to talk about when a treasured collection becomes burdensome clutter.
You're listening to the Declutter Hub podcast, bringing you tried and tested, no-nonsense tips and advice from the leading experts in decluttering and organising your home. Now here are your hosts, Ingrid Jansen and Leslie Spellman.
Hello and welcome, listeners. I'm Ingrid.
And I'm Leslie.
If you've been here for a while, thank you so much. We really appreciate you listening in week after week. And if you're a brand new listener, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss our weekly podcast. Now, I'm quite excited about this podcast, Leslie, because I don't think we've ever talked about collections before.
I know. Are you excited?
I know.
Actually excited?
Yes.
Because
I want to tell you about my collection, and I want to know if you've ever collected something.
Oh, well, that's a new one. We've not written that down, have we, on our little notes? But anyway, that's fine. That's something to look forward to. Yeah, it's time for us to talk about collections because it's something that people really struggle with when it comes to clutter. And sometimes, as we said in the intro, it does become a little bit burdensome. So when does a collection become not a collection and become clutter? That's what today's all about. And we're going to give a few little hints and tips about some of the things that you might want to think about if you have a collection that's kind of taking over your home, which is something that sometimes happens. So before we get started, let's say, what is a typical collection? Now, this could be like thousands of things, but let's talk about some basic ones that people will consider to be an actual collection.
Well, the things that I've seen over the years, Leslie, I mean, yes, the options are massive, but things that I've seen is, for example, that people collect ornaments of cats or owls, or my aunt and uncle, they collected honey pots. I think that was like a true collection. They had hundreds of them in like display cases and everything. What else? My mom collects Swarovski, like those really shiny little glass.
Yeah, glass, kind of intricate glass items. Yeah, my mother-in-law used to collect Swarovski as well, and my father-in-law's got a few of those left, so still has the collections. And Ladro is another one, sort of beautiful pottery. You know, stamps as well fall into the mix, don't they, Ingrid? People collect stamps, coins. Then you have people who collect like train sets. Some people collect vintage magazines and comic books. There's like tons and tons of things that people collect.
I've got another good one. I know somebody who collects Beanie Babies. Right. And who collects Barbie dolls, but still in the packaging and only like the special editions one. I didn't even know this was a thing, Leslie. Magazines, like comic books, like going back decades. Yeah. I mean, there's so many things you could collect. Beer mats, Coca-Cola bottles, I don't know, beer glasses. I mean, there's just lots. I mean, empty perfume bottles. I think I once read somebody who had like or the miniatures, like the miniature perfume bottles. I mean, the list is endless, isn't it, really?
Yeah, and recently there was that lady in the UK. So if anybody was around in the UK a few months ago, there was a lady that collected carrier bags, wasn't there? So she collected like old carrier bags. She's got 30,000 carrier bags, hasn't she? And they're all, luckily, her husband has some kind of factory or something. They're all in his factory, so they're not taking over the house. But she's got carrier bags. But actually, it's a piece of history there, so you can kind of get it because it shows branding over the decades. So a lot of these collections are pieces of history, and they're very, very interesting. And obviously, it depends on what makes you tick. And some of these things have just happened over time, haven't they? And they've been there since childhood. And they're tricky to let go of when they start to take over your house, if indeed you need to do that. We're not here today to say you need to ditch your collections. That is not what we're all about. But sometimes we work with people who struggle with those collections because they've become unwieldy and too big of a collection, and they're taking over their homes, and that's a little bit of what we want to talk about. But equally, so we've talked about like typical things, and you will know what your collection looks like. But there are also things in homes which become a collection, and people view them as a collection, even though they're typically standard household items. So things like books, shoes. I love my collection of shoes and very much see it as a collection of shoes. Designer handbags is another one as well.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Anything else that you can think of, Ingrid?
Cookery books, going into the tens or the hundreds of cookery books, a CD, DVD, or vinyl collection. We definitely see, when kind of people start to collect them and start to kind of grow them, and then suddenly before we know it, it turns into a collection. It wasn't even intentionally to be a collection, but because there are then so many people see it as a collection. What else, Leslie?
Do you know what? I was a little bit nervous over Christmas, actually, because my husband, who, does like a beer, has kind of moved on from kind of standard beers, let's call them, into like IPAs, and they all come nowadays, these IPAs. A lot of them have got really fancy artwork on the outside of them to make them stand out, haven't they? So all of a sudden I go down into my basement and I see 25 IPA cans like lined up in the basement. I was like, what is that? Like, where is that? What? Because let me tell you, my husband likes stuff and likes things and buys things all the time. It's a constant battle for me to keep on top of things in the house. But honestly, I was like, please don't tell me that we are now collecting old IPA cans. It was just like, but luckily he said, I just want to take a picture of them and then going to let them go. I'm like, thankfully. But anyway, it can't be anything. You feel my pain, Ingrid. You feel my pain.
Yeah. So can I then conclude, Leslie, that you've never had a collection, or have you collected something? I want to get this out of the way. I want to know. We've never talked about this. Have you ever actually collected something?
Well, I wouldn't really say it was a collection. I mean, I do have like memorabilia and scrapbooks and stuff like that, but I wouldn't say it was a collection, because it would just be, yes, I have my Duran Duran scrapbook from like 1981 to, however long that was, when I was a big Duran Duran fan in my teenage years. So I do have things in that, but I wouldn't view that as a collection. That's just a one-off kind of scrapbook, like a more of a collecting a few bits of memorabilia. I know what else people collect. People collect theatre brochures. When they go to the theatre and to shows and concerts and stuff like that, people like to collect one from everything that they go to, don't they? Yeah. So no, I don't think I've ever been down the collection front. So I know you are chomping at the bit to tell us what your collection is. So let's get it out of the way then. What? Yes. Or do you collect?
Well, I don't collect anything anymore. But when I was young, I collected stamps.
Okay.
And I absolutely loved it. I don't know why I started it. I think maybe my grandfather or something gave me some stamps and a little album and went, off you go. But I actually got really seriously into it, and I got I will specifically tell you, I collected Dutch stamps, so from like all through the years, and I had beautiful albums where you have to put them in, and some of them are actually worth quite a lot of money. I mean, when to buy them, selling them is a whole different story, but anyway. And I collected stamps with windmills on them.
Nice.
Because I'm from Holland and I think windmills is a thing. And actually I had stamps.
Sorry. You think windmills is a thing? Are you actually saying that? You think in Holland that windmills are, they absolutely are a thing?
I know, because there is one actually very close to my parents' house. So maybe because I've always seen this windmill all of the time in my life. I thought, that's nice. So actually, Leslie, I had stamps from all over the world with windmills, which is, I think, very, very cool. And I collected stamps with cats and dogs on them. I have no idea why, because we actually never had a cat or a dog in my parents' house.
Maybe that's why then. Maybe that's why, because you had them on the stamp rather than got the real thing. Maybe that's kind of a sense of loss.
And Anne has been begging me for a dog, and I'm like, no. So maybe
you can have a stamp, Anne. You can have a stamp with a dog on. That's such a that'll definitely replace it. Well, I never knew that. And so where's your collection now?
So at one point when I left my elderly home, my mom took over because she kind of took over my collection. I kind of lost lost track of it, and and at one point when she was downsizing, she sold my collection. But I think, and I'm actually going to have to check this now, I think everything is gone, but in my head, my album with my windmill still has to be somewhere. So I'm now, after this podcast, I'm going to have to look at it. I know there's 2 albums here on my bookshelf. I actually am not sure, because my husband collected stamps as well, but he never had the volumes that I had. I mean, I had like proper 2 big shelves full of albums. So my mom sold that when she downsized, because she was like, she was, her eyesight was deteriorating as well. She said, I just can't look at it anymore and pick it up. And she had a bit of problems with her motor skills in her hands, her fine motor skills. So she said, I can no longer do it. I mean, Mom, I really don't want this collection here. I'm way past that now. But it was a big thing. So she actually went to like a proper stamp shop and had it valued and all of that kind of thing. So yeah.
I would love to get my hands. I mean, I talked about the beer can collection, but Steve literally now that I'm sitting here I'm thinking, actually, he's got like 27 different collections, but luckily they're not completely out of hand, but they're all little bit. I wouldn't really view them as a collection, but he does like to collect some stuff, but luckily it's kind of later in life. He's got stamps as well, for sure, but he also has like various figurines, like Star Wars things, a bit of that going on. There's definitely Lego stuff going on, so the more cooler, not the kind of children's Lego, but the kind of adulty sort of Lego. He's definitely got all that stuff as well. So I'm not, but I just put him in his one room. So when Luke moved out, he's got his little room where he can put all these stuff, and Luke's following suit. My oldest son is just like him in terms of stuff, so he definitely likes to keep. So he's starting with the collections. But anyway,
so I'm just saying,
we've got a good feel for what a collection is. Yeah,
I'm just thinking, poor Luke's girlfriend. She's got no idea what she's got coming with the collecting.
I know, exactly. If he's anything like his father, and at least his father didn't start until he was late. Like Luke's literally started that when he was 14. But anyway, right. Okay.
Anyway,
so what is it that makes a collection special, Ingrid? So we've talked a little bit about your experience with collections, my husband's experience with collections, but what is it, when we take it down to the nitty-gritty, that makes a collection so special and something that we love?
I think it's because it takes normally years to build up. I mean, it took me years to build up my stamp collection, and I was part of this little club where you had these little books with stamps. You could pick them out, and you had to stamp that you bought it and put a little money in an envelope. I vividly remember all of that. So you curate and build it up over the years. Sometimes you were lucky and you would get something for your collection as a present or for Christmas or something like, or you would buy something from your own hard-earned cash to expand your collection. It's a hobby. It's not just the collection. I think it's the whole thing about it. It really becomes a hobby. Just like people love crafting and making things, I think having a collection is something that takes time and energy and interest, and you build it up and you see it grow, and I don't know, it made me really happy.
Yes, exactly. So something that you love, something that brings you great joy, something that you have curated over several years and enjoyed the curation and enjoyed adding to your collection. Very, very important. I think it's a collection. What makes it special is being able to display and enjoy it on a daily, weekly, monthly basis is very, very important as well. Yeah. And I think one of the things as well is that often we think of a collection as being being our legacy. This is something that we might pass on to future generations as well. So those are some of the kinds of things that make a collection so special and so coveted for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think so as well. And I think it's sometimes maybe not even the emotional value, but I think also sometimes the monetary value. Because, I mean, for example, if I think about my aunt and uncle who collected the honey pots, I mean, they had them, honestly, from all over the world. They were part of a honey pot club. I remember at a random holiday in Cornwall running into this honey pot shop, and I couldn't believe it. I was like, I need to buy a honey pot for my aunt and uncle. I never bought them a present, but it was like so specifically them. And luckily enough, they didn't have it yet. And they had hundreds of them, and they had them beautifully displayed. They knew the background of a lot of them, which region they came from, how old they are, which years. It was almost like a historical thing almost, some of them. And they had like one prized glass cupboard where the most expensive ones were in, like the proper silver ones and the really rare ones. I mean, fascinating.
Completely fascinating. I think more recently as well, I don't know whether people have collection, like younger people, we work with younger people. Do they have collections in the same way that people used to do that years ago? Do we think it's the older generations that have collections, or do we think that younger people have got those too?
Wow, that is a really good question. I mean, yeah, maybe younger people have a lot more books and toys and things like that. I mean, my son, as you know, is a Lego lover. He has a massive amount of Lego, but I don't think he sees that as a collection. I just think he sees it as a toy, as something to play with. Well, maybe later he will see it as a collection, but now it's actually something that he really builds and enjoys creating and finding all the pieces, and he involves me finding pieces that are lost and all of that, and which I love secretly because I do love of course, Lego, and I love spending time with him. So, collections, maybe things like ticket stubs for concerts or something, Leslie. I mean, of course, it's been a bit weird in the last couple of years with lots of being cancelled, but I think probably teens and stuff might collect stuff.
Yeah, I think the opportunity to do that is gone. Now it's like e-tickets on your phone.
Yeah.
And so I think the digital age has probably taken a lot of that away.
Yeah.
So I don't know I think it's a really interesting thing, but my experience of collections is definitely that it's the older generations that have these collections, because nowadays, if we want the silver honeypot that your auntie had, we can go on eBay and we can find that in 5 minutes. If we go back 30 years ago or 40 years ago, trying to find something like that was such an undertaking, and that makes it so much more special than now.
Yes.
When these things are so readily available. Information is available, stuff is available. If you're willing to pay for something, then you're probably going to be able to get it for the most part, aren't you? And so I think it's very different times that we're working in. So I do wonder, I'm not saying that younger people don't have any collections, but I think they view stuff in a very different way.
Fascinating. I love chatting to you about it. So let's take a break, because of course sometimes collections completely can get out of control. So let's talk about that.
Hi, just a little break from this week's podcast episode to ask you a question. Are you feeling completely overwhelmed with your clutter? Have you tried to declutter hundreds of times but get stuck? Well, in our 45-minute free webinar, we will unlock the 3 ingredients you need for decluttering success. Are you ready to take back control? All the details you need are at declutterhub.com/3-ingredients. Okay, so welcome back after our little break. Now we're going to get all doom and gloom and say, what's the problem? We're all getting very enthused by our collections, and now it's like, but sometimes they can be quite problematic. So what's the problem? Not always, but sometimes, Ingrid, with a collection. I want to reiterate that we're not here to be mean decluttering ladies about your collections. That's not what we're here to talk about. But we want you to think about some of these things. You might be like, you know what, I'm absolutely fine with my collection, Ingrid and Leslie, just back off. Then you might be like, oh, actually, it's not quite as joyous as it used to be. So Ingrid, what can be the problem with a collection?
Well, Leslie, I think first of all, a collection, if it can get out of control. When people start to give you from lots of different directions items, oh yeah, you're the one who collects the owls. I saw this, here's an owl. And people start to give you random bits for your collection. It can go out of control, and you might not have enough shelving. You might not have enough display areas. Your windowsills are full. Everywhere you look, you now see these owls. And it's like, oh my word, what am I going to do with them? And then you grow out of space. You're going to have to then find boxes that you're going to fill up with stuff. You might lose complete control of what you have, because it now turns into the hundreds or the thousands. And it's like, I don't even know where to begin to put all of these. I mean, if it's a beer mat, one box can house hundreds, so you can still keep it under control. But if the items are larger, where are you going to put all this stuff?
Yeah, I know but you hit the nail on the head there, Ingrid, where you become known as the person who collects that stuff. And if this is stuff that's readily available, and we always talk about owls. I don't know, like we just have a fixation with owls. I don't know why, but other animals are available, of course, to choose. But it's like you did with the honey pot. It's like, oh, there's a honey pot. My auntie would really like that. And maybe your auntie is like, you know what, we've got 50 very special ones. And what we want to do now is we want to really keep the special ones, and the only ones that we're going to be at or at this kind of range or like this level or whatever.
Yeah.
But everyone else doesn't know that. And everyone else is still thinking that you want to collect every owl or honeypot that was ever available. Yeah. And so that's the problem. And then that brings with it, we talk about burdensome in the intro, didn't we? That brings with it a level of guilt and obligation to keep these things that people are giving to us. So there's emotions that come with having those collections when other people are adding to your collection. I want to take things really down to a simple level now, Ingrid, and talk about dust.
Yeah.
Collections are a really big problem for dust, unless they are in display cabinets, which is nice. But if you've got a huge collection, chances are they're not in a display cabinet. They're out and about, so you can get them get them displayed. Sorry. And so, but dust is a real problem. And then when they've not dusted and not maintained, then they start to look a little bit sad and neglected, don't they?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's what we see a lot as well, especially when it's ornaments. I mean, other things you can, maybe put into a cupboard or in a box, but ornaments, a lot of people want to display. But if they've been in the same place for years and years, tucked behind 12 other ones of the same collection, and they've never moved, they're never being cleaned, it really does start to look sad. And it causes, and we can see that a collection can cause friction within a house and within a family, can't it?
Yeah, definitely, because people like it at the beginning, but then when it becomes a little bit too much, there's a few too many ornaments and it's taking over rooms or space that could be used for other things, then people start to kick back and it starts to cause problems within families, with children, with parents, with partners, and we see that. So we definitely see arguments and friction happening because of what you would consider to be a very beautifully can never say that word, curated collection, and other people see absolutely as clutter. And this is the problem. And what do you do with that? You love it, but somebody else doesn't love it. But you have to share that space and you have to decide whether it's worth it, don't you?
Yeah. You know what, Leslie, the more we talk about this, the more collections that pop into my head. I mean, I'm suddenly like thinking about my husband's best mate who collects Smurfs. Like his whole life, he has a beautiful display cabinet full of Smurfs. And
I bet his wife, has he got a wife or partner? I bet his wife absolutely loves that. I think I would have to. I'd be like, nope to the Smurfs. Enough. Can think about something else as long as it's cool, but no Smurfs unless you want to, like literally stay in your room the whole time and not. Keep it under lock and key.
Yeah, and I was also thinking about. I once saw this thing on television about this couple who had a whole house full of royal family stuff. Yeah. I mean, it was like incredible. So I'm sure we've got the this year the 70 jubileum. I'm sure she could,
is that what it's called? The 70 jubileum?
Like the what's it called? The platinum jubilee of something like 70 years. Yeah. I'm sure they're going to be back on television showing off their house, because it's not even, it's not just plates and ornaments. It's like wallpaper and like rugs and flags, and it's like, it's a lot. So if you're living in a house together, I think you both need to be on board with that level of collecting, because otherwise you'll probably go a little bit like, whoa, what's going on here?
Do you know what, Ingrid? It's really no different to the other sentimental items and memorabilia that we talk about in the membership. And we've got courses all about sentimental items and memorabilia. And the things that we talk about all the time are, you need to be able to enjoy it. So enjoy that stuff. So it needs to be out on display. It needs to be somebody where you can get that joy. There's no point in it being in a box. And also then quality over quantity. So for example, when we talk about quality over quantity, your auntie who has a honeypot collection may have decided, right, okay, this is the maximum amount that I want. I've got it under control. I'm only choosing certain honey pots, very special ones, or I'm happy to get rid of a few of the ones that are a bit cheaper or that I've had for a while or whatever, or that are not special or coveted or collectible or whatever that is. But then she's got that added, problem that little Ingrid has brought her this honey pot from Cornwall and is really super happy and is probably going to look for her little honey pot every time she goes round to her house. And then what does she do? Because of course it involves a lot of emotional energy to make those decisions about what you're going to do. So you are thinking, don't really want this in my collection, but I feel like I ought to. You've got guilt in there wrapped up. And so there's a lot of, that's one of the problems, I think, with having a collection.
Yeah.
Even if you wanted to make some inroads into that collection, to offload some of it, to declutter some of it, to make it a more kind of quality-based collection rather than quantity-based, then the decisions that you have to make are hard, because this is something that, as you said, that you put your life's work into. You've got years and years of history with that. These are not easy decisions. So that's one of the problems with the collection. And so it's easy to just leave it to one side and say, that's very special, not touching that, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think what my aunt did, I mean, she was super, just to clarify, she was super happy that I bought it for her. And it was in her house, but when they downsized, they very specifically said, we are going to stop collecting this now. We're going to, they sold off 90% of their collection to other collectors around the world. They only kept one case with their special ones that they loved collecting. Not always expensive, but the ones that they appreciated the most. And they gave a clear message to everybody in their world going, we stopped this collection now. AKA, please no longer buy stuff for us. So, and thankfully, I only found one over all these years. And I think it was because I never buy anything for myself on holiday, kind of knick-knacky wise. I think I was really glad I could finally buy something. And it wasn't for me, but for somebody else. And it was special because it's not something you see everywhere. So I think you're right, Leslie. I think quality over quantity is so important, whether it's sentimental items or a collection.
Exactly. So let's get down to some practical things that you can do. If you're like, okay, I've been listening and I kind of know that's me, and I kind of know that it's becoming a bit of a problem for lots of the reasons that we've spoken about. What am I going to do about it? Because this is hard stuff. And let me tell you, this is hard stuff.
Yeah.
So some of the questions that you might want to ask yourself are quite basic. Do you enjoy caring for it? We've already talked about dusting and taking things out of boxes and looking at, do you enjoy doing that? Now, the answer to that might be a categorical, yes, I absolutely love doing this. It's part of my daily life. If that's the case, that's fine. But if you're like, do you know what, I've fallen out of love with caring for this collection, I'm finding it so much of a chore, then maybe it's time to think about decluttering some of that collection, or all of that collection, in fact.
Yeah.
Ingrid, any other questions that we might want to ask?
Yeah, I think a very valid question is, do I have enough space for this collection? Have I actually run out of space? Or do I need to make my collection smaller so I can enjoy it more instead of going for the quantities of items? Maybe I need to kind of thin it out a little bit to enjoy it a lot more than I'm doing at the moment, because now I can't display it. There is too much. It is a burden to me.
Yeah, and we've talked a little bit about generational stuff, and that we feel that a lot of these collections are people that are maybe of an older generation. We don't know. We're just making that up, so we don't know for sure. We have done no research on this, but we kind of have a hunch that way, don't we, Ingrid? Mm-hmm. And we've also talked about downsizing. So that decision might be taken out of your hands. So Ingrid's auntie that decision had to be made because she could not bring that to her new downsized property. So it might be something like that as well.
Yeah.
I think as well, one of the things about these collections is quite often this is something that we have been building up over years and years and years. Do I still like the way it looks, or is it quite old fashioned? And so sometimes we might not want to display that because it feels quite old fashioned. If we go back into the sort of 60s, 70s, we had more knickknacks out on display. And typically nowadays, there is a more minimalist look in homes. That's not to say that you need to be completely minimalist or can't have knickknacks, but typically the trend is to have less on display than 30, 40 years ago. go, isn't it, Ingrid?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think also, I think what a good question is to ask yourself is to say, is it actually manageable what I'm doing? Is the time of the time that I spent on my collection, the money that I spent on my collection, the space that I need for my collection to do this properly, is that manageable in my current life where I am? Or is my collection being neglected because I don't have enough time? I've got other pools of my time at the moment. My priorities have changed. I used to really enjoy it, but now something else takes precedence over this collection. Do I want to park this collection and come back to it? Or actually, I'm going to be realistic here, and it feels like I've outgrown this now. I need to find a good home for this collection, maybe keep a couple of key pieces, and that's it. So big questions, hard questions, Leslie.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things that I think is really important, because this is something that with a lot of sentimental items, we talk a lot about whose memory is it. And I think it's really important to ascertain at this stage whether this will be your legacy, whether your children or people that are younger than you that you're going to pass your things on to do want your stuff, do want your collection. Because if they don't, there's a chance that they're not going to care for it or try and pass it on in the right way, in the right kind of circles. So if you know that your children are not going to want your owl collection, because that's the one that we've been talking about a lot, then maybe what you need to do is use your current communities, because as we said, a lot of people have got other people in the owl collecting community that may want some of your collection, and you would feel much happier for it to go to somebody who was truly going to love it rather than somebody who might just send it all to the charity shop. So really think about that legacy side of things as well, and be realistic and have those honest conversations with your children.
Yeah, absolutely love it, Leslie. So how are you then going to declutter some of your collection, Leslie? Let's give one or two tips. Like, where do you start? Where do you start?
Tricky. Now, one of the things when it comes to collections that we talk about, and this can be clothes, shoes, bags, books is a big one as well, is that once we have in our mind that something is a collection, we find it very difficult to see it as anything other than a whole. We don't see it as individual components. Does that make sense? And so what we do is, oh, no, you can't touch my books, you can't touch my owls, you can't touch my honey pots, you can't touch my shoes. I absolutely love them. We don't break them down. When in actual fact, there will undoubtedly be things in that collection that are less important than other things in that collection. So once you allow yourself the opportunity to break it down and to actually look beyond the kind of whole, then you will find things. And so our first tip is you need to break it down. You need to allow yourself permission to break that collection down in your mind and take it one item at a time.
Yeah. And the other tip that I want to give is, if you feel like your collection is growing out of control, start with the 1 in, 1 out rule and go, okay, if I'm going to add something to my collection, another item from my collection needs to go. Or maybe even if I'm going to put 1 in, I'm going to take 2 out. So to condense your collection a little bit if you feel it's getting unruly and just too much. So those are two kind of, I think, small things to start to think about and get your head around and try out for yourself. So, and maybe over time you can start to get some clarity about what you want to do with your collection and what is the right thing for you to do. Is it, I love it, I'm going to do my collection forever, or wow, this has made me realize I've completely fallen out of love with my collection. I need to pass it on to somebody who's going to enjoy it. Or maybe you're somewhere in the middle realizing I want to keep having my collection, but I need to do it on a smaller scale and go for the quality over the quantity here. So I think that's what we got today, isn't it, Leslie?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say when we are working one-to-one with clients, often it's a no-go area, isn't it, Ingrid? So we might talk about that, but normally we get the vibe straight away whether something is off limits, and then we would tackle other things in the home, wouldn't we, before that? Yeah. So a collection is off limits. So you need to decide for yourself whether that's off limits for you. Think about those questions that we talked about in the middle of the podcast. Is it bringing you joy? Do you have space? Have you outgrown it? Does somebody else want it? Because that might be a great starting point for you to do a very difficult task of breaking down that collection.
So thank you so much for listening. We're back next week when we're going to talk about maps and travel guides. So see you then.
Thanks so much for listening to the Declutter Hub podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to us in your podcast player so you don't miss an episode, and we'll see you next week.